Hello aviation fans, Sky here, and we are slowly approaching the final of our Tupolev history. Today we will meet another large airliner of this design bureau. The Tupolev Tu-204 is a family of twin-engine passenger airliners developed by the Tupolev Design Bureau in the late 1980s. Born as a result of the effective work, this plane became a good response to the challenges of the time. Due to technical excellence, efficiency and reliability, it quickly became one of the most popular on the market. By the mid-2000s, the number of aircraft exceeded 1,000 units, soon making the Tu-204 the most popular in the history of the USSR and Russia and… a beautiful story. But it may seem that some real facts do not agree with what I have just said. Perhaps the fact is that the only true thing of the above history is the name of the aircraft, the Tupolev Tu-204. Now I should probably tell how everything happened in reality.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Yes, the real world turned out to be a much tougher place, and the history of the airliner was not so bright from the very beginning. Let's take a look at this beginning. In 1972, Aeroflot introduced its passengers to the brand new Tu-154. Being quite effective for its time, this aircraft took its place in the parks of airlines of different countries, and the Tupolev Design Bureau continued on its way. And at that moment the question arose, what's next? The answer to this question was the new trend, the airliner families. The idea was to create several unified planes of different classes, and then, on their basis, develop families that together would form a complete set, from small to large. A history had shown the idea was right. A confirmation of this can be considered the model lines of Boeing and Airbus, a few basic machines and a bunch of their versions. Choose what you like and take it. The first herald of this trend was to be the new medium-range twin-engine airliner. In fact, it was a wide modernization to replace the Tu-154 in the future. But this bright time quickly ended. The world entered the age of wide-body airliners. The newest Douglas DC-10, Lockheed L-1011, Airbus A300, as well as the Soviet Il-86 appeared in the sky. Wide-body airliners were more comfortable, could carry more cargo, and were potentially better at almost everything. Well, at least everyone thought they were. The Tupolev concept had changed. Now, the future plane was supposed to be a medium-range, wide-body airliner with a capacity of just over 200 passengers and equipped with 3 engines, something similar to the Douglas and Lockheed flagships. The idea of creating a family was not abandoned. The main model was supposed to be the largest one, and based on it, the Bureau wanted to create both regional vehicles to replace the Tu-134 and Yak-42, and a medium-range model to replace the Tu-154. At the same time, the number of engines also varied. In the end, all these ideas crystallized in 2 models, the twin-engine Tu-204-200 and the 3-engine Tu-204-300. But the adventure was not over. By that time, the question of creating a new generation was already raised at the government level. For the power plant, it was decided to abandon the good but aging engines and to create a new, more advanced one, the project of which received the name D-90. At the same time, the preference for the 3-engine scheme remained. 2 engines on a wide-body airliner were economical, of course, but rather weak. Prospects for such aircraft, the first representative of which was the A300, at the time seemed unclear. By 1982, the draft design of an aircraft with a capacity of about 208 seats was ready. The project had almost reached the finish line. Almost, but no. By the time the design draft was ready, the 2-engine concept began to win. The proponents of the scheme received rather bright examples. Boeing launched 2 models, 757 and 767, to the market, and the idea of the A300 was continued in the new A310. At the same time, the 3-engine DC-10 did not become a bestseller, and the seemingly excellent L-1011 TriStar was an epic failure that finished the Lockheed civilian aviation business for good. the Ministry of Aviation Industry of the USSR abandoned the old blueprints and came up with a new concept. Now the idea was to create two aircraft, developed by different design bureaus, but having common systems and engines. The implementation of this concept was to be the medium-range Tu-204 and long-range Il-96. Considering that now the 204s was supposed to have two engines and did not anticipate further increase, the Tupolev engineers decided that there was no sense in making it a wide-body plane. Therefore, it eventually became single-aisle. The engine was also redesigned. The D90 was brought up to 160 kN and finally received its final name PS90. The Tupolev Tu-204 was to be the result of use the most advanced Soviet aviation technology. It was decided to start the production at the Ulyanovsk aircraft factory, where at that time the largest transport in the world, the Antonov 124, were already assembled. While they were preparing a production line, the prototypes were assembled at the Tupolev experimental plant. On January 2, 1989, the plane made its maiden flight. However, at that time, the economy and the political situation in Russia, in addition to a massive reduction in funding of the aviation industry, made it necessary to significantly shorten the test program. At the later stages of work, the Tupolev engineers and pilots had to operate the cargo missions on the prototypes just to make some money to buy fuel. Certification of the Tu-204 and its engines were completed by 1994, but the commercial operation only started in 1996. Structurally, the Tu-204 is a rather familiar modern aircraft. Unlike its predecessor, the average person would hardly distinguish this plane from foreign models. The aircraft received a fairly effective wing, advanced mechanization and a new wingtips. It was equipped with a classic three-leg landing gear. The main gear is equipped with four-wheeled reinforced bogies. The closest model, Boeing 757, has a similar landing gear design. Basic power plant, two PS98 turbofans, the same as were used on the Il-96. There was a foreign alternative, but more on that later. The Tupolev Tu-204 and Ilyushin-96 was the first Soviet and Russian civilian aircraft to receive the fly-by-wire control systems that significantly simplified flights and optimized the design. During the development, a lot of attention was paid to the cockpit and the ergonomics of the interface. Tupolev did not embrace the Airbus fashion on the side sticks, and the plane received a classic yoke. Nevertheless, despite all innovations, the flight engineer was not abandoned, and the crew of 3 people remained in the cockpit. Airplanes can accommodate a different number of passengers, depending on the modification, but almost all have the same limit, 210 to 115 people. The cabin has a standard for narrow-body airliners, 3+3 layered in the economy class and 2+2 in business. There was of course quite a lot of modifications to the Tu-204s. The first version, traditionally for Tupolev, was simply called the Tu-204. It flew in 1989. The series production, a very relative concept in this case of course, but still, the series production started with its first highest, the model 204-100. On the basis of this version, various options were created, with improved equipment, English language cockpits, as well as the option -120, which received the Rolls-Royce RB211 engines. These aircraft were delivered to Egypt and China. The Tupolev Tu-204-200, also known as the Tu-214, was slightly heavier. It increased the payload and the amount of fuel, which allowed it to fly a little further. The fuselage of the Tu-204-300 lost 6 meters in length. Its capacity dropped to 164 people. This was done, of course, for the sake of increasing the range, which reached 4,000 miles or 7,400 kilometers. In 2010, the Tu-204-SM made its maiden flight, the widely improved version. The optimized aircraft received updated avionics and modern cockpit for crew of 2 pilots, yes, in 2010. The updated PS98-2, created in collaboration with Pratt & Whitney, was applied as a new power plant. In general, the Tu-204 was quite an advanced aircraft, which was supposed to replace the Tu-154 and potentially become as popular. However, the collapse of the USSR and major cuts in funding for the industry led to reduction in the test program and problems at the beginning of operations. and the difficult financial situation of both factories and developers did not allow them to solve these problems on time. The weak development of the after-sales support for the new model led to the fact that the aircraft, in anticipation of repairs and spare parts, remained out of service for an unacceptably long time. In addition, in 1990s, many airliners, fragments of the old Aeroflot, were unable to purchase new planes and used what they already had, the Tu-154. And when some of them eventually did acquire the resources, they didn't want to take risks with the new model, but instead bought the already well-tried European and American planes. Another backspot was the marketing. The Tu-204, in this regard, has become a real collection of the concept errors. The plane was unlucky from the very beginning, when over the years the developers and the government couldn't decide what kind of plane they want to create. Big, small, wide body, narrow body, with 3 engines or 2. In the end, the airliner, which in theory had to start flights in the mid-80s, was a decade late and appeared in the mid-90s. And while creating the plane, as can be seen from the description of modifications, the developers were desperately looking for customers, creating many models that were not really complementing each other. The Tu-204 SM, which was created in the 2000s, fixed many problems and suppressed the previous versions, but still could not offer any serious advantages over the Boeing 737NG and A320ceo airliners. The domestic market was too small and the aircraft was not interesting on foreign markets. And with the creation of the new Max and Neo generations, the plane became obsolete at the beginning of operation. Also, as a postscriptum, I can add that the Tupolev designers at one time made the right choice abandoning the path of a 3-engine wide-body airliner and did not make the same mistake as McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed. But even the seemingly successful Boeing 757 also eventually failed. The niche, which includes the Boeing 757, Tupolev Tu-204 and the Airbus A321, turned out to be quite little, and from this trio, only the Airbus airliner is being mass-produced at the moment. But it is worth mentioning that according to a number of studies, this middle of the market has a certain potential in the near future, but it will be a playground for other planes. The fate of the Tu-204 by the time of the SM model testing was practically predetermined. Resources of the Russian aviation industry were redirected towards the creation of the MS-21 airliner, which is able to compete directly with any modern aircraft of this class. But the time of Tu-204s is not yet gone. The plane and its modifications, the elements and systems of which are almost entirely produced in Russia, are in demand from the Russian military and other government structures. Due to this, the production of the aircraft continues in low quantities. In total, by the beginning of 2018, 85 units were produced. Most of them are used in the parks of government operators in Russia. Also, these aircraft are operated in the parks of several commercial companies in Russia, Cuba, China, Egypt and North Korea. And that's it for today. A slightly complicated and somewhat sad story. Comment below what you think about this plane and its fate. And do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Fast flights and soft landings to you.